Welcome to the Mediacasters with your business besties, Corinna Brenden and Julie Loken. In every episode, you'll get behind-the-scenes access to experts who share their struggles and successes in podcasting, publishing, and presenting. So grab a pen, grab your bestie, and kick it with Corinna and Jules.
Welcome, everyone. You have joined us for another episode of the Mediacasters. I'm Corinna Brenden.
And I'm Julie Loken, and we are so excited to be sharing our message through the Mediacasters platform. It's so new, it's amazing, and we are getting used to saying the Mediacasters during this rebrand.
That's right. It's still relatively new to us all. And today we're going to have a conversation about what it takes to really get the word out there about your podcast and the power of having a website to help you do so. So that's going to be exciting for any of our podcasters or anybody that's even considering starting their own show. You need somewhere to send people, right?
And WordPress can be overwhelming. Wix, there's a lot of different feedback for these platforms. I know WordPress is probably the best, as Corinna tells me all the time, for SEOs. Yeah.
For SEO, if you want to spend the time, effort, and energy to manage a WordPress site, but the reality is to do it well, you need a developer. You need people to help you. You need a team, essentially, working on your website. Unless you just happen to be somebody who does designs WordPress websites all day long anyway.
That's why I'm so glad Brenden Mulligan came into our lives, Corinna. He, with a snap of a finger, he has changed the way I've thought about building my website and creating my online presence.
Right. And so for anybody who doesn't know Brenden Mulligan, he has been working in the field of technology for some time. He doesn't even have a podcast of his own, but he saw an inadequacy.
We're going to change that.
Well, yeah, we have to change that. But the reality is that he saw something that we all needed that we didn't know we needed. And then he sought to create it. And the company he built is called Podpage. You can just go to podpage.com and check them out. But I'm going to go ahead and bring Brenden up to the stream so he can talk about this himself.
Brenden. We all need a little Brenden Mulligan in our lives, especially as an entrepreneur or a podcaster.
Yeah,
Thank
Brenden,
you so much for having me.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's go back to baby Brenden. What was it like to be Brenden? I mean, you must always be thinking outside the box. It must come from somewhere, thinking about how to make life easier for people in general.
Yeah, I actually don't know where it came from because my dad was a very traditional, 9 to 5, work for someone, do a regular job type person. There isn't a lot of people in my family actually who have done sort of an entrepreneurial thing. But yeah, even when I was in high school, I was starting a little web design business or starting a logo design business, always trying to do something, have a little hustle going on. So it's been like that for a very, very long time.
So you were probably somebody who would have spent the time to build your own WordPress site and have it actually function the way you wanted it to. But that's not many of us anyway.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's funny because when I was doing websites, helping people with websites in high school and college, it was there were no website platforms that existed. Maybe GeoCities, to date myself.
Oh, but yeah, I remember GeoCities.
No idea what GeoCities is.
I started I went on a big trip and I was writing HTML to do a blog I didn't call it a blog. Their blogs didn't exist, but I created a website where I'd post messages back to my family and post photos about what we were doing on a regular basis. And I started trying to build a travel journal platform without even knowing the concept of blogs yet. So I've been tinkering for a very long time.
That sounds like a forum, Brenden, like an early forum, almost an early Facebook, but just for the family.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, it was a link that only the family had, but yeah, it was really, Blogger probably was just getting started at that point, which I feel like was the first really widespread blogging platform. But yeah, just the concept of sort of posting things on the internet easily was a pretty strange thing. And I've kind of been in that track for a very long time, making it easier to post things on the internet.
I guess as a mom of 4 boys, and Corinna has 2 boys, did this all start with you playing with Legos? Tell me yes. Just the ability to think outside and have a different vision.
The earliest that I can remember is of this kind of stuff was like baseball cards and coming up with ideas to like trade baseball cards and sell packs of cards and build little games that people would play at flea markets where they could do a game and they get a grab bag of cards. You know, I remember stuff when I was younger around that, but yeah, I don't know I don't know where the building part came in. There was always like little ideas for doing design work. I was always interested in computers. I mean, that's the biggest. My stepdad brought home a computer super early, and it was very cool. I was never into like computers in the way some people are, where they wanted to take it apart and write programs and stuff. But I just thought it was just an amazing device, and I spent a lot of time on it.
Right. Well, I think that's most of us, at least anywhere close to Silicon Valley, right? Like I grew up here, and I think we were among one of the first families on our block to have an Apple Macintosh computer, you know, with just that one disk drive in the center that you'd
Oh
like
my
put
gosh.
in. So to kind of date myself, but also just kind of give you that snapshot into time. It wasn't every house that even had a computer at that point in time. You would go to the office. You didn't even use Word. You used Word Perfect, and Word Perfect was perfectly imperfect and hard to use, if I'm being frank and honest. But, you know, we just didn't have the tools at our fingertips that you have today. And so what I love about what you've done so far with Podpage is that you've created something that I can go for any RSS feed and create a mock website in literally 5 minutes or less that's fully functional and that automatically updates without me having to go and monkey with HTML to do anything at all. And so as a marketer, I'm just speaking here, it makes life easier for anybody who might have a podcast and choose to like say, hey, I want my own individual website that I have some control over, but that's not going to take my right arm off to figure out how to use.
And can we take this down a notch for the people? And this is why I belong here, to kind of
Oh,
digest this information. You know, I'm hearing a lot of acronyms: RSS feed, RSS, HTML. What is it, Corinna Brenden?
Yeah, the genesis of Podpage was actually discovering the RSS feed. And so when you're a podcaster, you load all of your content into some podcast host, whether it be Buzzsprout or Anchor or Libsyn, or, you know, there's 40 of them. And what that podcast feed really does is it takes your files, puts them on their server, and creates an RSS feed, which is just sort of like a internet standard way of reading all the information about your episode. And when Apple puts it in Apple Podcasts, when Google puts it in Google Podcasts, Spotify, all those places, when they actually show your podcast to the world, all they're doing is reading off that RSS feed. And this is actually fundamentally very different than how, you know, even like Apple, what do they call it now? I guess it's Apple Music, but how iTunes works, or how Spotify's music side works. When with the music side of most of these services, you have to transmit your music files to them. They store them on their servers. And so there's no like public feed of all of a musician's music. It's really, you know, each site does it differently. But with podcasting, they all just read the same feed. And so anyway, to answer the question, so that's the RSS feed. When you're building a website, there are all these sites of companies have been created, like Squarespace and WordPress, that make it easy to be able to like use a web browser to build a website and then not have to learn HTML, which is the language that most websites are built in. And JavaScript or Squarespace and WordPress are great for building these great websites, but what they miss is when you go to Squarespace to create your website as a podcaster, you have to then, what's your podcast name? All right, type that in. All right, upload your photo. Okay, upload my photo. Okay, what's the description? Oh, you want to do an episode? Create a new post. All right, I'll create a new post, episode name, and you have to create all this stuff, but it's all actually already there. And so with Podpage, the genesis story was, I have a couple friends who have podcasts who didn't have websites. I found out that you could get all of the information you needed. It was all public. And so I essentially spent a weekend just turning all that information into a nice looking website and showed it to them, and everyone sort of was blown away because they didn't have to do any work. And so kind of the goal is for you not have to know any of these acronyms, right? You don't need to know acronyms. You just need to know, I need a website, how do I get a website? And then 10 minutes later, you have a website that you love. That's the ultimate goal. Because you sort of made a joke at the beginning about me not having a podcast. Like, I think podcasters should spend all of their time creating great content.
It's not a joke, Brenden. We weren't joking at all.
I think I should spend all of my time making it easy for you to make a website. I think it'd be a waste of time for me to be fumbling around trying to figure out how to build a compelling podcast, and instead just like make it easier for you all who are the ones who are good at it to do it. And so that's really the goal, is like, I feel that same thing when I was working with musicians. It's like they need to be writing songs and touring and building and communicating with their fans. They don't need to be, there's so many monotonous things that you need to do. And so it's like, take all that stuff off the plate so they can focus on being creative and writing great songs. That's what's important. I think the same for podcasters. And so,
Yeah, I would have to agree. And just to clarify for people too, you do have to get an RSS feed no matter what if you're in the world of podcasting. And so the parts of the puzzle that you already do just to get that RSS feed in the world, you create a square show art piece, which is basically your marketing piece for your show that appears everywhere, every platform that slurps your RSS feed, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeart Radio, Spotify, or whatever. They all slurp that picture as well as your show description, your episode notes that you input into whatever hosting platform you have. And so all of that information, you're already taking the effort to put out there anyway. And usually when you build a website that has these things, you might get a player that you can build in, and the player will have your queue of a listing of your episodes or something to that effect, but you won't have individual blog pages for each episode. And so what Podpage does is create that for you automatically just from the information you put out there on your RSS feed. And then you have the ability to do things like add your transcript, add additional show notes, put additional assets down, even have your audience leave you a voicemail message, which could later be used on your
That is so
podcast.
cool. The
So,
voicemail.
like these things, like that's a pro feature that you have to end up paying for after you try and use it for 14 days. But like, it's something that's hard to miss because like you're wanting to engage with your audience, right? Like we want to hear from you, and these are already podcasters, or maybe they are just avid listeners of a show and they want to convey with emotion that you can't necessarily really get out there just through writing an email. And so they can literally tell you a story or leave you a message and even provide you with something that you could end up using on your podcast. So I just love that. I love that built-in functionality, and you don't have to do any of the coding. You don't have to find the plugins. You don't have to pay for an extra service to do it either. And so all of those things kind of come together in one spot, and suddenly in that 5 or 10 minutes, you've created a show page that looks far better than anything you might get built in from Simplecast or Libsyn or any of the other hosting platforms, some of which offer you a basic podcast page and some of which offer you, well, something that's a little harder to manage or just doesn't look good enough to want to share with the world. So,
yeah, I think
Took
actually
me
a lot.
2
I
minutes.
usually tell people to podcasters, like, people shouldn't spend any money that they don't need to spend. And so, especially at the very beginning, I always tell people, like, your hosting platform might give you a great page that's good enough for a very long period of time as you're building up. You know, don't do Podpage until you want to. Like, focus on great content, focus on great guests. Get your podcast built up. And so for those pages, for some people they last for a bit, but they always need more, always. And so, I think like there are some hosts that give great websites. There's some hosts that give awful websites, but regardless, it's a good place to start. But generally, people want a little bit more. And the biggest missing piece on those host websites, and also the biggest. So I talked about why I thought it would be interesting to build this, but the actual necessity, I think, is what you've kind of touched on, which is a direct communication with your listeners. And you don't get that through Apple or Spotify or Google or iHeart or any of those. You get they're Apple's customers and Google's customers and iHeart's customers, but you don't know who these people are. You just know that 15 people or 15,000 people downloaded your podcast. And, if those platforms go away, so does your audience. This is what happened with musicians on MySpace 10 years ago. And so with a website, you can choose to engage with them in any way you want to. On Podpage, we have a voicemail feature. You can just collect email addresses. You can have comments on your blog posts or on your episodes. Like, just getting that direct one-on-one communication with your listeners ultimately is what's going to build like a longer term relationship, which means a longer and more like resilient audience. So as you grow, your audience grows with you and sticks around.
right. And I think something not to forget is that we actually get to a position where we're able to really connect with our audience in a new way. Like we can ask them, hey, I have this particular thing I'm working on right now. I'd love to hear from you. Here's a question I'd love you to ask, or I'd love you to answer on my website. Just go and click that microphone button and leave me a voicemail. So I think that's just very helpful.
It's all about connection and it's all about relationships and the ability to do that through your website because especially in today's day and age with 1,000,000,000,000,000,000 podcasts, 1,000 things to be listening to, the white noise of our lives, to have something so curated, to have something that is so personalized, I think is brilliant.
And something you control.
Mhm.
I think
We
that there's
like
a
to
big,
think we're in control.
well, uh, yeah, but you're in a lot more control when it's your website, your domain that you own than when hopefully your listeners will get the alert from Apple and that alert comes through at the right time and all the different, there's just so many things that you're putting in other people's hands when your entire listener relationship is through a different platform. And there are these like amazing, free, incredible distribution channels that should be totally used. But I just worry when people rely on them 100% that if those channels change something, then a lot of the control has been in someone else's hands who isn't looking out in your best interest. So,
Well, that's right. And that's why I get advice pretty consistently when you're sending people somewhere for information, you send them to your website. Website. If you say contact me on Instagram, they're on Instagram. There's a big chance that they're going to get distracted by whatever's in their feed at that moment anyway. So it's not necessarily the spot that you want them. And if they fill out a simple form on your website, you tend to get their email address, which is also helpful because then you can take the conversation somewhere else. Now, I know you also have integrations with things like MailChimp and other pieces so that you can go ahead and create basic connection for anybody who fills out one of those forms. But you also have something that I think is pretty compelling from the review standpoint. We put ourselves out there in every way we can. We ask people to write reviews, and you'll see some on Apple Podcasts, but you won't necessarily know that the review came through unless you go and check because there tends to be a lag. Let's say you asked a guest for a review and it posts something like 3 days later. Well, if you have the pro subscription to Podpage, you get an alert. Like I got an alert in my inbox. Check out this new one. You've got a great review on Podchaser because you also integrate with Podchaser. Or people can even leave a review directly on the site from podpage.com / whatever your page is. Or if you've paid for the custom URL feature, then whatever your custom URL is. And I just think that's very helpful. It's also inspiring for people when they keep kind of getting that, oh, people are listening and these are the reviews I got. It makes you feel inspired to keep going when sometimes, in those early days when you're just getting started, there's a likelihood that you're going to pod fade to the background, right?
Well, and also it's really nice for new listeners to come on. When we import your reviews or when people leave reviews, they're published on your website. Now we only publish the ones that are 4 stars and above, and you can choose to change that, but no one does. And if someone leaves a direct review on your website, we don't publish that until you approve it because we don't want someone being able to write whatever they want to write on your website without your
Well,
approval.
it could be spam, right? Like I
Yeah,
get spam on my WordPress site all the time, and half the time I'll get like a 3 or 4 star review, and it's actually somebody asking for services or threatening me even to say, "Give me a backlink, or I'm going to leave you bad reviews on every platform."
Really? You've
Yeah,
had that experience?
Yeah, it
Wow.
happens about every week now. So as your
Really?
traffic improves to your site, if you have a functionality on your WordPress website that is like leave a comment or leave reviews, often these nefarious people will use those spots to do these spammy sorts of things. They don't act on them. They just threaten because they're trying to get you to give them backlinks to their site so that they get better metrics than Google. It's all a scam.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But the good reviews are actually helpful for people who might not know if they want to subscribe to your show to get a little bit more information without having to listen to a ton of episodes. So having those on your website gives the opportunity for new listeners to maybe be compelled to dig a little deeper. So, and a lot of people don't use the reviews as a marketing piece, and they're great. They're testimonials, but we try to make it really easy for you to use those on the website.
And the power of building your online presence is so important. So many of my clients throw all their energy into social media, into Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and when we invest in social media, we are really working on borrowed land. It's nothing that we own. So the importance of building your online presence with something like a website, something as easy, you make it easy for me and I did mine in 2 minutes. I just want to say 2 minutes, and it blew my mind. But it reinforces that online presence that is so necessary in today's age.
Yeah, I think that there's a balance in general when you want to make, in general, in software development, you want to make it everything as easy as possible for the user, and sort of there's also the thought of like go where the listeners are, go where the users are. I've heard people who they don't like iTunes or Apple Podcasts, and so what they'll do is they'll sign up for some unknown player, only put their music on that player, and then tell their listeners, well, I don't like Apple, so you can't listen to me there, but you can listen to me on this other third-party site. Sorry, it's shocking when suddenly my whole screen is me talking back at myself. So I think that getting people to go to like a place that they're not used to going, you're going to lose listeners because you're making it harder for them to do the thing they want to do. And I think that that by using, by telling people to go to Apple, it's like, hey, just subscribe to me there. It's where they're already listening to podcasts. I think the website's kind of the same thing. Like there's the balance of you do want to use Instagram and TikTok and all those things too, because that's a way to get people, but eventually you want to bring them over to something that you own. You can start on these platforms, but like you don't want to stay there with your entire relationship with the listener. So I think all these things are like great lead generators, but you eventually want to have a direct relationship with them. And so you're on your own land.
Now, I know also that many people have asked you when you're going to provide a functionality that you have to somebody who doesn't have a podcast. Because the one thing you do require is that you need an RSS feed to create a pod page, right? And which makes sense because you're for podcasters. But I wonder if there are any other developments in the rafters that we should know about.
So I've set out to build. One of the reasons that podcasters love Podpage so much is because it's built for them. And for a while, I was thinking about expanding into like the YouTuber vlogger world because structurally a lot of it would be the exact same. But my hesitation again always goes back to that area of focus. And like if I started to go into the YouTube world, I've learned so much about the podcasting industry, podcast hosting, podcast conferences. It's taken years to really feel very, very fluent in this language. If I were to try to leave and go into a different area, I feel like the product would have to totally change and the sort of focus would change, and that would end up making it a worse product for podcasters. And so I would like to make it, the areas that I would like to improve isn't so much make it like a good general website builder. I think Squarespace, is actually great. I think they do a great job. Wix is great. Weebly is great. They're all really good. I think the reason that Podpage is fundamentally better is what you just said. It took 2 minutes for you to create this website, and it's got all the features that a podcaster would want. And that's not an exaggeration. It really is like you enter your RSS feed. When you do that, we figure out who you're on iTunes and we start importing your reviews. We put your voicemail widget there. Like we do everything in like seconds, really. If I were to, the reason Podpage is great is because you don't start with a blank slate. You get to start with something. And I think if it was like a generalized website builder, it would be a totally different product. And I'd rather Squarespace handle that. What I do want to do is make it a little bit easier. If you might not want your podcast to be like your front and center marketing piece, maybe you're an author with a podcast and you just want to have like your landing page, your homepage be more about your book than about your podcast, or you're a podcaster, but really you have a coaching business and you'd like that to be different. Those are the people that I hate turning away because they're the ones that end up having to go use WordPress because they're like, I don't want my podcast to be the header, and I don't want my front page just to be my recent episode. They're like, I want it to be a lead gen page, and I just want it to, that kind of flexibility isn't there yet. And so I can see that's the kind of customization I'd like to add, but not go the full direct. But you're still doing it because your podcast is mostly your core object. I don't really want someone to use Podpage if they don't have a podcast at all. That would be sort of failure in my mind.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about as you spoke about these YouTubers is that they could theoretically just take their YouTube, pull the audio from that, create an RSS feed, launch it as a podcast, and you have the tool that automatically connects with their YouTube page and brings all of that down front and center. So they have a page for the podcast, a page for the video. They could even integrate the video into the individual pages if they wanted to do so too. It's just very functional that way. And I just think that there's so much that can be done within the framework you have. We have one member of our community that launched her podcast recently, Stay On Course. She has her own webpage with all those ClickFunnels you're talking about as a coach who helps people develop their businesses and their personal kind of goals in life, right? To stay on course. And so that's the name of her podcast and the name of her book. So all kind of come together. And she just links to her pod page from her page so that all of the functionality of Podpage is something that's there to support the journey of any listeners at the same time that she pushes first to her, of course, Stay On Course page. And so there's another way to do it. You can always kind of adapt and blend.
That's the only thing we recommend. That like when someone says, I've got this great WordPress page, a lot of people will ask, can I embed Podpage inside my WordPress page or inside my Squarespace page? And it's impossible to do. They want it to be like, Stay On Course /podcast is their pod page. And it's just, that's not how it works. But what we can do is, and what a ton of people will do is www.stayoncourse.com is their brand, book, all that. Podcast.stayoncourse.com is their Podpage site. That we have thousands of people who do it that way. And it's a little different because you're kind of bouncing back and forth between two websites, but it's still under the same umbrella. So that's been most people's solution for that.
I love that. And I recommend to everybody listening to this episode to go check out Podpage. It is unbelievable. It is like magic. And I'm not over exaggerating either. What is next for you, Brenden? What's next for you in Podpage?
This year, the biggest projects are all around. So we spent, I launched it in 2019, maybe like December 2019, maybe first thing 2020. I can't really remember, but it started what I described. It was a landing page that listed your episodes, and each episode had its own page. That was the end of the product. Then we added the reviews. Then we added 1,000 other things, because what we did is we put it out there for podcasters and we said, what is missing? Tell us what you want us to build next. And so that led to lots of features, like we were talking about, reviews, voicemails, all that stuff. It didn't really lead to sort of making sure that the editing experience was better, or making sure that there was a little bit more flexibility in the pages. And so the big project this year is to we feel like a lot of the features are done. And now it's more about sort of connecting a few smaller dots. Like, for dumb example, but the navigation bar. So all your links listed at the top of your page. That is in a very specific order with how our code works. Being able to change the order, not a trivial thing. It's actually very hard because of how we built it, because we've been adding features. So we just sort of add another feature, add another feature, add another feature. Moving things around just a little bit harder. So there's some fundamental work that it's not going to be like sexy, splashy features, but it will ultimately be the things that the most people come to the site and leave because of. Most of the feedback I get from customers now isn't like, oh, this is a missing feature. It's like, I just wish I could customize it this way. And so that's what's coming. Being able on your homepage to have more of like a graphic interface as far as editing. Hey, I want to put a big block at the top with a picture on the left and text on the right. None of this stuff is this is all stuff that like most website builders built like 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. We just chose, instead of building that stuff first, to build all the podcast useful stuff, and then we'll go back and do the more boilerplate stuff. That's what this year is.
Right. Well, I will say the functionalities are there. I ended up, when I first built a pod page, repurposing some of the pages that you have preset and renaming them. So for instance, you have a sponsors tab, and I have a not-for-profit style podcast, and I didn't want to be sitting there just like looking like this is for, a bunch of sponsors. So what I did instead was changed it to action, because it was the action page, and then created like what you have as a framework for the sponsors. I actually used that to highlight the things that I wanted people to take action and do to support the topics I was covering in the podcast. And so even I think your avid users will find workarounds in ways that you don't anticipate. But you also revealed to me kind of functionalities that I wanted to have from my own WordPress site when I went that route. And when I got to a stage where it made sense to do so. And so I'm a big fan of the work so far. I will say, just for anybody listening, if you have doubt that you can customize the site enough to look enough like your own site, you really shouldn't worry too much. You can go to a dark background or a light background. You can choose several different formats of what your piece is going to look like. You can customize fonts. There's many, many fonts to choose from. You can upload your graphics, your specific logos that you want to use. And so all of that really works functionally really well to make a site that reflects your brand. So anyway, that's just kind of what I wanted to leave the audience with before we wrap.
Before we kick it, Corinna?
Before we kick it. That's right. So Brenden, that's the thing.
Brenden, hold on to your hat.
Brenden,
hold on to your
that's
hat,
the thing.
Brenden.
Yeah, hold on to your hat. And kick it with Corinna and Jules. Now, we like to ask all of our guests to just say, kick it before we close.
Let's kick it.
All right, let's kick it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of The Media Casters. You can keep this conversation going and kick it with Corinna and Jules in live office hours each week. Visit themediacasters.mn.co to sign up. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe whenever you listen. Let's kick it.